Yalda Hakim. Ukraine says a further round of evacuations is needed to rescue several hundred civilians from a steel plant in war-torn Mariupol. Dozens of evacuees who were rescued on Sunday are expected to arrive in the Ukrainian city. Also on the programme, scenes of joy as New Zealand reopens its borders to international tourists for the first time in more than 2 years. That's all coming up here on Impact. After officials in Mariupol said the evacuation buses are yet to reach the agreed pickup point. President Zelensky has said he hopes evacuations will continue today if conditions allow. The Ukrainian government says around 1,000 civilians remain trapped. Brown, Ben, over to you.
Yes, hello from the Ukrainian capital. Well, this country's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said today he hopes those evacuations from Mariupol will continue. Civilians are still trapped in that huge industrial complex there, the Azovstal steelworks. Ukrainian fighters still holding out inside it, underground, against the Russian siege. The Ukrainian military says that Russian forces have actually...
After weeks of living in the most appalling conditions, they emerged into the light, freed by negotiations that took place in the dark. There was much secrecy around the talks, brokered by the United Nations, but the sight of a small number of civilians walking through the...
Use a bag as a loo.
Svetislav is just 6 months old. Nearly half of his life has been spent underground in a bunker. For Ukraine's president, a moment of relief.
After many attempts, different people, meetings, calls, countries, proposals, finally, there was not a day when we did not try and save our people.
After leaving the plant, civilians were loaded onto buses and taken convoy. Everyone caught in the siege of Mariupol has suffered terribly.
The scariest part is when they are shelling, when you see a shell exploding and people dying.
In patrol boats by one of their Bayraktar drones. Despite the success of the talks over evacuations, few people think diplomacy will be bringing this conflict to an end anytime soon.
In the city had been hoping to get onto buses at 7 o'clock this morning. Those buses have not left yet. So what will happen to the evacuation of other civilians from the city or from the Azovstal steelworks, we still don't know. And inside the last stand against the Russian forces, why did they go to the Azovstal steelworks in the first place? Well, it's a real fortress going back to the Soviet era. It was built in the 1930s, and the Soviets built a whole network of about 30. He told me about why it has been such a fortress for the Ukrainian defenders of Mariupol.
We never thought about it until 2014. We didn't imagine that Azovstal, when Mariupol, especially the eastern part of the city, came under shelling by artillery, heavy artillery, we started to think about what we could do if the escalation came further into the city. And when the war started, we made an announcement in the city that all people, if they were injured during the bombing and shelling, could come to us. We thought it was possible we'd be shelled, and well-fortified point.
So that was Enver Skitishvili, the Director General of the Azovstal steelworks there in Mariupol, with some fascinating detail, really, about why Ukrainian troops wanted to go there in the... Chansk is encircled on 3 sides by Russian troops. Now, most of that town's residents have left, with the last remaining in some pretty desperate conditions now, under constant Russian shelling. Our correspondent, Andrew Harding, has been there and...
Road into Lysychansk, a farming town under siege. We're following a Ukrainian army medic, Olive Kravchenko, pointing out the town's latest lacerations.
Worse now? Yeah, very extreme and very dangerous. Very.
The army have taken over the local hospital. A soldier is brought in by ambulance with a head wound. With concussion. Faces dazed and haunted. I've got 3 young children, he says. I wish the shelling would just stop. We've all watched in this region. They're pushing slowly forwards against this town and a dozen others in the Donbass region. But there's still no sign that the Kremlin's forces are about to deliver some kind of knockout blow. Even here, a few civilians cling on. These parents saying they can't afford to flee. And 9-year-old Masha is trying to take it all in her stride. Не страшно, the sound of the bombs? Не страшно? You're not scared?
Не страшно.
А почему нет?
Потому что я старшая девочка.
She says, because I'm the oldest girl, I'm not scared. Good for you. But has no means of getting out. Her husband wants to stay.
Нет, почти уже.
Извиняюсь. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Lysychansk.
Andrew Harding with that microcosm of what it is like at the moment in the east of this country where the war is raging. Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid has described those comments from Sergei Lavrov as unforgivable, outrageous and a terrible historical error. That's the latest from Kyiv. I'll hand you back to the studio in London.
Steel plant, they tell of harrowing stories of what it was like under the steel plant, how they had no sunlight for at least 2 months and lived in absolute terror. So go to our website, usual place, bbc.com, for the very latest. Go to New Zealand as it continues to ease its border rules. It's a boost for tourism and for families torn apart. But what country will they find? From Auckland, Simon Atkinson reports.
A cuddle that's
my first grandchild. I'm just so pleased to finally be able to get down here to actually hold this little precious bundle.
I originally applied for a working holiday visa in February of 2020. And I'm finally here.
Amazing. Vaccinated travellers from more than 60 countries are allowed into New Zealand without quarantine after one of the world's longest and toughest border restrictions. But they're arriving in a nation still adjusting to the idea of living with the virus. For most of the pandemic, COVID-19 came, but for some, patience wore thin at the government's strict approach. A sense that as the world was moving on, they were being left behind. Violent protests in Wellington back in March shocked the country. Police clashing
isn't made up for the decrease in international, but underlining everything the government has done has been keeping our communities safe and the health and well-being of all New Zealanders. Hence the reason why we're arguably conservative in our approach, but it has meant that we didn't have Delta sweep through.
Happy day. Simon Atkinson, BBC News, Auckland.
Stay with us here on Impact. Still to come. Can the EU end its reliance on Russian gas and oil as divisions appear? European Energy Minister.
I, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, do hereby swear
willingness to coexist.
Roger Bannister became the first man in the world to run a mile in under 4 minutes.
Memories of victory as the VE celebrations reach their climax.
This is Impact on BBC. They face discrimination from Ukrainian border officials while trying to reach safety. BBC World News presenter Peter Okwacha travelled to the Ukraine-Poland border just days after Russia invaded to hear their stories, some of which feature in the BBC Africa Eye.
We are students, we are not fighters. This is not our war, it is not our fight. We want to go. We want to go.
As they fled, many have been treated as second-class citizens.
We are not allowing any black people.
Syrian medical student who was based in western Ukraine. On her way to the Polish border, she says she was stopped from boarding a bus.
I was begging. The official literally looked me in my eye and said in his language,
women here as well. They are women. Why aren't you letting them pass? We were the last people for over 18 hours who were let to pass. It was horrible. It was uncalled for. It was deeply inhumane.
I needed to go there, and even though they'd reached Poland, there was still unease.
I still don't feel safe. When I walk past, I can see people staring. I know they might do something. They could attack me or something like that.
We understand what these people who had crossed from Ukraine were telling me. And for them to say it was worse on the Ukrainian side, I just can't imagine. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
Yeah, we just arrived to Lviv.
The Ojimadu family were much moved by the reception they got as they crossed into Hungary.
The love shown is overwhelming at the borders. Little things, but they make it.
BBC News.
Germany has now signalled it's open to a ban on Russian oil imports, but is warning the move won't be without consequences for its people. The comments came from the country's Vice-Chancellor's EU Energy, who told me Germany's position had changed.
Germany is the largest economy in the EU and by nature is the largest consumer when it comes to oil and gas and dependence on Russia in terms of volumes. But there is something...
Isn't it, Carol, that I suppose it's about phasing out for Germany. So you say this is a drastic shift, but when we say drastic shift, we're not talking immediate or in the next month or 6 months. We're talking potentially end of 2020.
Very big economic hit from the pandemic. And now if you cut these very important supplies overnight, then definitely there's going to be a recession based on various forecasts we're getting by different agencies. Whereas if you do it gradually, you allow these countries to look for...
Many critics that this is fueling and funding the conflict.
Unfortunately, it's a trade-off, but at least in the next few months, as the dependence on Russian oil and gas is going to be reduced, but we're talking about the EU only. The problem is that globally, you don't have a unified position vis-a-vis Russia. So unfortunately, although for us who are all against that war, then that will simply mean that there will continue to be revenues flowing to oil and gas the EU, but as long as other countries such as the biggest oil importers in the world, like China, like India, don't come on board, there will continue to be money flowing into the Russian government coffers.
That was Carol Nachli. Anna Moskwa called for immediate sanctions on Russian oil and gas. She also said Poland is proud to be on Putin's list of unfriendly countries and said Poland is ready to be fully independent from Russian oil and that Poland was willing.
Hello there. Heatwave conditions have continued across much of the northwest of India, parts of Pakistan, with temperatures in the upper 40s Celsius, so well above what we expect this time of year. Now, the heat has abated somewhat, but it's still Sri Lanka as well. And quite a few showers are likely on Tuesday across the northeast into Bangladesh. Some of these could be really violent in places. Further north, we've got the heat, the humidity as well, close to the coast. So Karachi will Wednesday. Thunderstorms breaking out as well across southern India into Sri Lanka and across the northeast corner. Like I mentioned, some of them could be particularly violent with large hail, very frequent lightning and torrential downpours could lead to some localised flooding. The
बीमार्क मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया, करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया गया. The mustard specialist since 1933.
Listen to, meaning our analysis is objective, unbiased, and I promise you with absolutely no spin. That's why we call our programme Unspun World.
On BBC World News.
This is our world.
I just seen the cops kill somebody.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
If I'm in jail, I'm living my life meaningfully.
Our world, this weekend on BBC World News.
The conflict here in eastern Ukraine is getting a lot more intense. The Russians looking to seize more territory, these Ukrainian army medics busy picking up the casualties. For more on the conflict here, join me, Andrew Harding, on BBC World News.
The conversation around miscarriage is starting to open up with things like this pregnancy loss exhibition. Having suffered several losses myself, I've been investigating why miscarriage happens and what's being done to improve care around the world.
In our connected world, all news is international. So, for in-depth analysis,
The impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating.
and correspondents covering both home and global.
Around 100 people who have been evacuated from a besieged steelworks in the eastern city of Mariupol are expected to arrive today in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. Kyiv says another round of evacuations is needed to rescue several hundred more people.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Of Tesla. Hello, a very warm welcome to World Business Report. I'm Samantha Simmons. Well, as the fighting in Ukraine goes on, the energy battle continues too. Talks could weather an oil embargo by the end of the year. But an embargo on Russian gas is another question. This just days since Russia turned off the gas taps to Poland and Bulgaria. And in the past hour, Poland's climate minister has called for immediate sanctions.
And you see a rift between the countries that have old refineries that are geared towards Russian-grade crudes like Urals and so on, and the countries with more modern refineries who can more easily switch, which is with gas. The thing is just, for countries like Germany, who get between 40 and 50% of their gas supplies, very heavily dependent on Russia. They need to get new gas in. They need to get. They're working at it, and they think in 2 years or so they will be ready to get themselves out of Russian gas.
Yeah, and Russia cutting off the gas supplies last week to Poland and Bulgaria. Have other countries going to be keeping a close eye on that? And
gas is important, but not that important. For Germany, it would be different. But you see that the countries who are really dependent on the Russian gas, even the Slovakias of this world, they're going with the structure that
Now, Henrik Fisker, the man behind the project, is back. Our reporter Theo Leggett asked Mr. Fisker if he thought his previous foray into the electric car world had been ahead of its time.
Absolutely. We were out with our vehicle 1 year ahead of the Tesla Model S, which probably was
major business. You're still a startup. It has a lot of that market locked up. You have to do something different. What are you doing now?
So, the EV market is only about 2% right now of the global market. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. We have the longest range in our price range. And then finally, I think that the commitment to sustainability goes a lot further than just making an electric car. Our factory is CO2 neutral, our supplier. Make well over 500,000 vehicles a year in 4 years. So I'm very confident. We got 32,000 reservations of a vehicle that is getting launched end of this year, which I think is amazing for a startup. It's paid reservations. So I think so far.
Markle in their latest move to cut costs. The show is one of several projects being dropped by the streaming giant. This comes after Netflix revealed a sharp fall in subscribers last month and warned millions more are set to quit the service. News that wiped
sort of trimming down in terms of what they're pursuing in terms of animated series. You know, it's really hard not to see, you know, that in fact there's a lot more competition in the streaming services. And if you look at the likes of Disney, which has a lock on that, and it's going to look at pursuing other options to try and continue to sort of bring up its content.
Yeah, so what other options are they looking at, do you think? What next for Netflix?
Right, so what Netflix of the Indian entertainment on its streaming services. The other question, of course, is that does this also signal the end of the Netflix so-called gravy train, where in the past, you know, producers knew that they could just take the real big blockbusters that they have had in the past, like, you know, The Crown, for example, or Ozarks, those are ending soon. So what's coming up next? And if you look at Amazon and especially Apple TV, you see that they've got a lot of really
by the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Morocco, the government announced plans to increase the minimum wage for public servants by 16%. The European Union has accused Apple of abusing its dominant market position in mobile payments by limiting the payment system is only one of many options. That's it from me for the moment. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Samantha TV News. See you later.
Transform the quality of what ends up on our plates.
So they really wanted to go into that other field?
The first thing those guys will go to is they'll go straight to the nettles.
Yeah.
Now, the stinging nettles have the highest protein. The higher the organic matter, the higher the nutrient density, the better it is then for the end consumer.
Follow the food, in association with Corteva Agriscience.
Since the beginning of time, scientists have gone to the ends of the earth to discover the next big thing. You'll never guess where we found it. Right here on the farm. At Corteva Agriscience, we're at the forefront of biologicals, a new class of naturally occurring organisms and compounds that help farmers protect diversity. Pheromones protect crops by disrupting the mating cycle of pests, not pollinators. We're working with farmers around the world to adopt biologicals as a tested and proven tool in their toolbox, so they can grow more.
Is BBC World News with the latest news and results from around the globe. Sport today.
And we'll tell you what Andy Murray and Rafa Nadal have had to say about Wimbledon's decision to ban Russian and Belarusian players. Ronnie O'Sullivan, chasing a record equaling 7th world title, is back in action at the final. To question the decision, the two-time champion there says he's not supportive of the ban, but says there is no right answer on the issue. Players from the two countries can't play at this year's Grand Slam because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Joining us, we're used to him understanding the sensitivities around this and very openly saying there's no easy answer. What specifically did Murray have to say, and Rafa Nadal?
Well, Murray also thinks that it's unfair, but also understands, saying that above all, that is more important than tennis. But the general sentiment among the players so far, most of them who have gone on the record, feel that it is unfair towards the Russians and the Belarusian players.
And that's right across the men's and on Wimbledon's decision.
Look, I think they didn't take this decision lightly. And I understand that they specifically did not want to put the Russians and Belarusians in a position where they had to distance themselves from the war, or Ukrainian players have asked them to do. I know that it's from Wimbledon's side, it was not an easy thing. As a tennis journalist, as someone who's part of this traveling circus that's the tennis tour, we all consider each other family. So when I think that we shouldn't do something like this, but also from a tournament's perspective, they have so many other things to look at, and government directives and recommendations coming towards them. They're thinking about optics, what if a Russian or Belarusian player wins.
Everyone's not on the same hymn sheet because, of course, the ATP Tour, WTA Tour have criticised and questioned Wimbledon's decision. How much of an issue is it that tennis isn't able to come down on this with one single answer?
It's definitely an issue, and the tours are might make Wimbledon a glorified exhibition if it's only giving money and not ranking points. So there is going to be an aftermath to this. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but there are meetings happening this week in Madrid about this.
It was a decision, of course, that Wimbledon took along with the British government. Reem, so much still. A tennis journalist in Madrid, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're going to bring you next the latest on the World Snooker Championship final, where history could be made in the coming hours. Ronnie O'Sullivan edging closer to winning a record-equaling. What Trump's been doing, he's been closing up that lead across the first session of Monday's play. And O'Sullivan now 13-8 up. So Judd Trump winning those 3 frames at a commanding 12-5 lead, as I said. O'Sullivan, but Trump coming a key role in helping to manage players' brain health and make sports safer.
It's the game we love, but what are the risks?
You've got to stay on the sides this time, let's go!
Thursday night training for Actonians.
About it, and there is more awareness, and it's good that it's finally arising, especially just ahead of the Euros this summer.
Just put your head back slightly, please, towards me, a bit more.
Jess is trying out a new brain scanning device, one of several playing again.
You can stop now, relax, open your eyes, have a little rest.
There's growing concern in rugby too. Just last week, England World Cup winner Steve Thompson revealed he no longer remembers the victory because of his early...
And then she gave me a kiss, and then she kissed me on my head. And I said, what's that for, darling? And she went, you've got a poorly head, so I'm going to kiss it better.
I've had quite a few MRI scans.
His World Cup colleague Ben Kay, along with other former players, has regular scans in research funded by Alzheimer's Society.
The speed, the strength of these players is increasing all of the time, and that can only lead to more injury unless we know how to deal with it. The teachers, the coaches, the referees at the junior levels, everybody has to understand it.
To assess if it might help. New UK-wide concussion rules are due to be drawn up later this year, building on what's in place in Scotland. The aim is letting people play their favourite sports while keeping them safe. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Hello there. Tornadic thunderstorms are likely to cause some issues over the next few days. In the last 24 hours, the satellite picture looks pretty wild. There's slight rain at times. Some wet weather through Central America for the northern quarter of South America. And this weather front bringing some really heavy rain at times for Uruguay and Paraguay. Thunderstorms, showers breaking out pretty widely across the European continent, both Tuesday and Wednesday. Another area of low pressure is bringing some really wet weather. Maybe some mountain snow, but it is hot across the Levant and into parts of the Gulf region. Thunderstorms and showers have been breaking out recently across southern and eastern India. High pressure will keep things fine and settle across most of New Zealand for the next few days.
Join Simon Sebag Montefiore as he discovers the rise of one of the great cities of the world.
Vienna, dynastic city, city of art and music.
A metropolis with an imperial past and a wealth of cultures, religions and ideas.
It all happened here in Vienna, the world city.
Vienna, Empire, Dynasty and Dream on BBC World News.
Here's a way of making your gadgets greener by using sustainable energy, something this solar cell factory in Sweden is taking to the next level. This machine is printing custom nano ink onto solar panels, and they don't
brighter substrate.
How is the end result and the usage of it different to other solar cells?
It actually harvests all kinds of light. It's sort of like artificial photosynthesis. So it will work under any light condition. LED, normal light bulbs, even in the shade, any kind of light.
You're sort of using electricity, but I guess it's just electricity that was being used anyway.
We're recycling light.
The extra efficiency means that those silver strips that usually run through solar panels are no longer needed, freeing up new designs. This robot is responsible for squirting electrolytes on them to allow conduction.
It looks like it's going to drip bits in between, but it's actually doing it very precisely.
It's more efficient and predictable, and for sure it doesn't make any mistakes.
A thick solar cell. Giovanni, tell me about the prototypes you've got here.
What you see here is a fully self-powered, sustainably powered headphone. It has a leather structure to it. Here's the solar cell is here on top, and it will actually...
A smart helmet can sense when it's worn in the dark and light up automatically.
Here are the charging panels, 1, 2 and 3. It's actually one cell underneath.
They really do blend in.
And this bag doubles up as a power bank.
And a phone as well, you're just not going to get enough power.
Laptops and phones, you need much stronger light, or you need a larger surface. But who's going to walk around with this large solar cell?
Something that big to charge your phone.
It's not going to happen. So it's all about finding the balance, right? What's the available surface doing, and it's sort of gamifying this.
I'm told this tech will never be put directly on smartphones because, well, leaving your smartphone out in the sunshine will never be a great idea. But this could be a step up from wireless charging for many others.
Hello. Can the EU end its reliance on Russian gas and oil? As divisions appear, European energy ministers meet in Brussels to discuss a way forward. Also on the programme, scenes of joy as New Zealand reopens its borders to international tourists for the first time. Welcome back to the programme. The latest attempts to evacuate civilians from the devastated Ukrainian port city of Mariupol and its massive Azov-style industrial site have run into difficulties. The Defence Ministry in Kiev said Russia hadn't seen daylight for 2 months. They're expected to arrive in Zaporizhia later. Our first report is from our correspondent Joe Inwood.
After weeks of living in the most appalling conditions, they emerged into the light, freed by negotiations. Shows they achieved what many thought impossible. A ceasefire held, and around 100 people made it to relative safety.
I can't believe it. 2 months of darkness. When we were in the bus, I told my husband...
Ukrainians, our defenders. Today we finally managed to start the evacuation of people from Azovstal. After many weeks of negotiations, after many attempts, different people, meetings, calls, countries, proposals, finally.
After leaving the plant, civilians were loaded onto buses and taken to the village of Bezimene in the direction of Russia. But, accompanied by UN and Red Cross staff, it seems they have now been allowed to head back towards Ukraine. It's reported that as soon as the evacuation had finished, Russian forces resumed their shelling of Azovstal. Indeed, there has been no let-up in the fighting, both on the ground and in the skies. Despite the success of the talks over evacuations, few people think diplomacy will be bringing this conflict to an end anytime soon.
And Joe joins us now live from...
...of this war. It's been absolutely appalling, and when you see the devastation, as we are starting to now, that's been visited upon the city of Mariupol, I mean, it's hard to believe that anyone's come out of there alive at all, but we do have maybe 100,000 civilians still in the wider...
underground with as you say, almost 900 others, and then of course the soldiers as well. They had no sunlight and they were fast running out of food and water.
Yeah, and I think add to the concept of being under that level of bombardment, that level of fear, of sound, combined with the continuous feeling of hunger, of not knowing quite what's going to happen. It must be an absolutely appalling experience, both physically and psychologically as well.
And challenges of that. And of course, these are the lucky ones, if we can call them that, despite their experience. There are so many others still trapped in that steel plant, still trapped in the city.
and many more who've never made it at all, many more who've lost their lives. I mean, we don't know yet the true death toll, the true count, the number of people that have been killed, but when you see the level of destruction that's been of people with critical injuries still in that plant, still underground, some of them soldiers, but many of them civilians as well.
Joe, and we still don't know the true horror of this conflict on the city of Mariupol. Those stories, but the true extent of it, we may not know until the bombs stop, until the fighting stops.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think this first group of civilians that come out, the first 100, to our colleague Laura Bicker, who's there. She says that there are a vast number of journalists there, and it's probably going to be a quite revealing moment for everyone in terms of our understanding of how this story, this tragedy's unfolded, but also probably not an easy experience for the people involved. They will have gone through the most appalling things, and they're then going to be faced with people asking them to tell their story as well.
Indeed. Joe, thank you for your reporting and for all our colleagues who remain on the ground to bring these stories out. And as Joe was saying there, several hundred people still stuck in that Azovstal industrial site and 100,000 civilians still stuck in Mariupol. Well, let's go now to the Azovstal industrial site, originally built in. Earlier this year, Ukraine gave fighters maps of the underground network and supplied the plant with 40,000 packages of food. My colleague Ben Brown has been speaking to the Director General of the Steelworks, who told him why Azovstal became a fortress for the Ukraine.
Пунктом в городе Мариуполе. Когда Мариуполь попал под прямой обстрел,
when Mariupol, especially the eastern part of the city, came under shelling by artillery, heavy artillery, we started to think about what we could do if the escalation powerful bomb shelters that, according to Soviet standards at the time, could withstand a direct nuclear strike.
порядка попадания одного прямого ядерного удара.
When the war started, we made an announcement in the city that all people, if they were in on two. So from a military point of view, it is a very strong and well-fortified point.
That was the Director General of the Steelworks speaking to my colleague Ben Brown a little earlier. Now, Israel has demanded an apology from Russia after its foreign minister suggested that the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler had Jewish roots. Sergei Lavrov made the remark on Italian television when he was asked how Russia could claim to be trying to denazify Ukraine when President Volodymyr Zelensky is Jewish. Israel's foreign minister Yair Lapid has described Mr. Lavrov's comments as unforgivable, outrageous and a terrible historical error. Azovstal steel plant about the terror and horror that they experienced over the last 2 months. So go there to read the latest from them as well. Now to the rest of the day's news. A fire in a residential area. The cause of the fire isn't yet known. China has begun testing a new COVID vaccine specifically targeted at the Omicron variant. The trials being conducted by the Sinopharm in the city of Hangzhou are being carried out on people who have accused Apple of abusing its dominant market position in mobile payments by limiting access to key technology for rivals to its Apple Pay system. The move could result in a hefty fine for the tech giant and force it to open its mobile payment system to competitors.
The preliminary conclusion that we reached today relates to mobile payments in shops. By excluding others from the game, Apple has unfairly shielded its Apple Pay wallets from competition. If true,
बीमार्क mustard oil, mustard specialist द्वारा बनाया गया, करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा, परखा, आजमाया गया. The mustard specialist since 1933. बरसों से सर.
Take away the noise,
The fury.
the fighting voices, the distortions, cosmetics, the color and the flashy effects, but most of all,
You can take away the lies,
the slander.
the misrepresentation,
This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. European energy ministers are meeting in Brussels to consider a ban on imports of Russian oil following its invasion of Ukraine. Germany says it would back an EU ban, ideally within a few months. 12% from more than a third before the invasion. Poland, too, says it's ready to be fully independent of Russian oil, with the country's climate minister saying Poland is proud to be on President Putin's list of unfriendly countries. Have a listen.
As you all know, and we appeal to countries to not to support the Putin's decree, to not to support the initiative to pay in rubles. We shouldn't support Gazprom Bank. We shouldn't support Russian economy. We are not obliged to follow.
Isn't it, Carol, that I suppose it's about phasing out for Germany. So you say this is a drastic shift, but when we say drastic shift, we're not talking immediate or in the next month or 6 months. We're talking potentially end of 2022.
Russia is going to suffer if it loses its most important market, that is the EU. But as long as other countries, such as the biggest oil importers in the world, like China, like India, don't come on board, there will continue to be money flowing into the Russian government.
But what country will they find? From Auckland, Simon Atkinson reports.
A cuddle that's been a long time coming. It's the biggest day yet in New Zealand's reopening to the world. But for these
little precious bundle.
I originally applied for a working holiday visa in February of 2020, and I'm finally here.
Amazing. The older you get, the more family becomes important, and I'm getting old and family's becoming very, very...
In March shocked the country. Police clashing with a vocal minority, angry over restrictions and about losing jobs if they didn't get jabs. With more than 95% of adults double vaccinated, most rules have now been Border closures have given the economy a rough ride too. Before the pandemic, international tourism made up 20% of the country's income. Recovery will be slow.
Obviously that increase in domestic tourism hasn't made up for the decrease in international. Conservative in our approach, but it has meant that we didn't have Delta sweep through our population like you have had in a lot of other countries. So I think that in the end, I think history will prove we did the right thing.
It'll be later in the year until New Zealand welcomes travellers from other countries, Auckland.
Well, I spoke earlier to Tess McClure, the Guardian newspaper's correspondent in Auckland. She explained what the reopening to the outside world means for thousands of families there.
And that people wanted to be able to reopen and that they'd done the work of getting vaccinated.
Yeah, and just give us a sense of the sort of impact that tourism has on New Zealand's economy, because this is, of course...
directly contributes more than 9% of GDP, so really substantial. And there are towns and cities as well in New Zealand that are hugely dependent on tourism for their income, for their... So, yeah, there'll certainly be some happiness and some celebration in those places to see the borders reopening again in particular.
And for so many families who have been separated to be able to see each other again.
Yeah, that have missed milestones. There's been a long run of really difficult stories in New Zealand of people having to miss funerals, saying goodbye to loved ones. As well as more joyful milestones like
returning to Fifth Avenue. This year, the theme of the ball, led by Vogue veteran Anna Wintour, is In America, an anthology of fashion, and the dress code is gilded glamour and white tie. Previous years have been seen flamboyant. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim. That's it from me and the team. Matthew will be here in 30 minutes' time. Goodbye for now.
In towards Sri Lanka as well. And quite a few showers are likely on Tuesday across the northeast into Bangladesh. Some of these could be really violent in places. Further north, we've got the heat, the humidity as well, close to the coast. So Karachi Tuesday and Wednesday. Thunderstorms breaking out as well across southern India, into Sri Lanka and across the northeast corner. And like I mentioned, some of them could be particularly violent with large hail, very frequent lightning and torrential downpours could lead to some localised flooding.
Get courtside at the tennis with the BBC Sport website and app. For tournament coverage including live...
Challenging. So when events move quickly, you need to make sure you have the facts, and that's where experience counts. Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories on BBC World News.
How worried is the WHO?
We really need to focus on bringing transmission down.
You've been in office for some time. What are you doing about it?
This question is without context.
What the turnout was, it was over.
Brink. The country's run out of cash for even basic goods. It now faces a political crisis too, with unprecedented mass protests. How will Sri Lanka solve this economic emergency? Join me, Archana Shukla, on this special edition.
The relationship is in tatters. Join me, Joe Inwood, for continuing coverage of the invasion of Ukraine here on BBC News.
Bennett said using the Holocaust of the Jewish people as a political tool must stop immediately. Germany's economy minister has said there is no agreement among EU countries on winding down supplies of Russian energy. Robert Habeck was speaking before an emergency meeting. Welcomed its first international travellers in 2 years with the lifting of coronavirus measures. And they're all your latest headlines here on BBC World News.
Welcome to Hard Talk from Bratislava. I'm Stephen Sacker. The longer the Ukraine war goes on, the higher the stakes become. Slovakia is a frontline state prepared to take. Ukraine for the Kiev government. Do you feel that as this war continues, week by week, month by month, the danger for your country increases?
Actually, I think it's decreasing because we are co-fighters for the values of freedom and democracy. They have to share their blood. We never had the need for it. But we support them because we understand. And that's why we'll be supporting him as much as we can.
To stop right now consuming Russian oil and gas?
No, we are not ready because the previous governments, unfortunately, and I think it's the problem of the whole Europe, and it's such a pity. I mean,
that, and you recognize what is happening, and yet your government is today, as we speak, financing Putin's war machine. And 85% of your gas comes from Russia.
I'm fully aware of it, and I'm so sorry through their sea and through their infrastructure into Slovakia. But at this moment, we are landlocked. That's why we are so strong advocates for unity and solidarity.
Yeah, but are you as strong on principle? Because what we've seen is those two countries. Will you here and now with me say, we in Slovakia will not bow to Russia's demand that we pay in rubles?
I will actually add to it that the initiative that we will pay in euros was the initiative driven by it. And I'm so glad. And that's why I say, for us as a landlocked country, so dependent, because you need to understand, the pipes now from Russia go through Slovakia and they go to Western countries. We were for years, for decades, responsible and reliable partner lines, other streams. And that's why we say, in order for this to happen, we need to be united and we need to be solidar to each other.
Yeah, but I need to press you a bit more on this payment mechanism, because it isn't just about simply saying we're not going to give Russia rubles. There is a financial but at the very same time, they're going to set up a ruble account, have the money converted, and the rubles will then be sent to Gazprom. It's a financial fix. Are you going to do that financial fix to ensure that you keep getting?
Because what you are asking, that's the game of Vladimir Putin, because he's playing a hybrid warfare with Europe, economic and also hybrid. He's trying to kill the unity because he knows if he splits us apart.
Play that game. It's a very simple question
I
for you, Prime
understand.
Minister.
No.
Are you going to play that game too?
No. I said we are going to pay in euros and we want to disconnect as soon as possible.
But if you are serious in what you've just told me, it is very likely that within...
That's where the next payment needs to be. And that's why we have still time and we need to develop the solution. There will be a meeting of ministers of energy in France in upcoming weeks. And everybody is trying to deal and we are pushing, please, let's stay united.
Using Russian gas. Are you saying they will have to change?
No, it's the same with us. I mean, we are very dependent, just like Hungary, Czech Republic, Austria, Germany. We are very dependent. But what I say, they have the vision of democratic and free country. And this is how serious this war is.
Yeah, so simple question for you, which I am sure Volodymyr Zelensky would like a simple answer to. When it gets to next autumn, next winter, when you...
That answer I don't have, because we are very dependent, but I spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky, and we all know, and he's actually a very smart man, and brave and smart, and we all understand, we need to disconnect, because it's not about a couple months, it's about terminal solution, permanent solution. We all know that. It's about permanent. And that's what we need to understand. We need to cut off from Russian oil and gas permanently. That's what we need to look for. That's where we are. Because we know once we do that, then we cut off the funding of Russia's war. And it is a long run. I said, if Putin divides us, then it's over. European Union, it's going to be such a hit, such a collapse, and we don't want this. I mean, Europe must become stronger on this, and it's crucial crossroad at this moment.
I send heavy weapons, including the howitzers that are made in Slovakia, direct to Zelensky.
Absolutely. As I said, I mean, our position is very clear, and it goes back to the value. And sorry that I repeat it again, but I killed by some dictator who decides that he's going to kill innocent people in the streets. I mean, it's ridiculous, 21st century. Therefore we support them.
Let's just go quickly.
That's why we gave them S-300. That's why I said, if whatever they request, we'll help them gladly.
Have you yet sent them to
You haven't
Ukraine?
asked us. That's what I said. And we are ready. I mean, of course, it would have some operation will be needed because we need to have first our airspace protected. We're already working for months on this. And I think we're getting to a conclusion. At this moment, we are in very close communication. Like you said, howitzers, we're going to repair their equipment. But MiG-29s, they haven't asked. But if they would...
Your people are repairing those captured Russian tanks and sending them back to Ukraine for the Ukrainians to use.
The agreement is almost at the final stages. It's very public. We don't hide about it. And this request we received.
Of what your own people here in Slovakia are going to be thinking about your message to me.
Oh, they know this message.
No, of course they know it, but what they also know, as of the last 48 hours, is that Vladimir Putin is threatening what he calls war.
He's been threatening ever since the beginning. We remember the nuclear weapons. That was his first threat. He said, well, we're activating the nuclear weapons. Immediately, it's caused discussion here. And I said, guys, come on, we cannot be defensive. We want to defend our independence. I mean, we were under communist regime. We understand what is a social imperialism. We have strong memories. We don't want to go back to that time.
But there's not being a coward, and then there's behaving like a responsible leader of your own people.
Of course.
You are ready to face down that threat.
You know what helps me? Helps me to look at Volodymyr Zelensky. Because he's the first in line. He faced this question several months ago, and it fights. But we need to help them because they need to
Zelensky,
remain their
but
freedom.
if I may say so, Zelensky had no choice because Russia chose to invade
Do
Ukraine.
we have a choice?
That's the question. Because you have
That's
people...
the question. Do we have the choice?
In this city today, you have people who are trying to figure out where the nearest bomb shelter is and are buying iodine tablets because they're frightened of nuclear attack. Those are your people.
Not all of them.
Not all of them, but that's a real fear people have.
Because that's the hybrid warfare. That's what he's trying. Putin is trying to make everybody or among the strongest in the continents or not. Are we going to be defensive or are we going to say, no, we want to keep our democracy and freedom?
Let's talk now about strategic aims of the West in this war. You're not ramping up arms supplies to Ukraine. Now, the Americans and the British are using the sort of language which suggests that the end game of this war has to be every Russian soldier leaving every
Ukrainians, and I support, it's their decision, whatever they say. I mean, it's their country. Who am I to tell them what they should have in the country? But I know they said that's their vision, and I support them in the vision because they're a democratic and free country. We are a community of peace. That's what
things like invade Ukraine in the future. And it may have been a slip of the tongue, but Joe Biden indicated that he believed Putin could have no future in Russia.
Again, it's the decision of the Russian people, of their leadership. And that's what we do in the democratic countries. Then that's what is my decision. But of course, we have to stop Putin to do this aggression. That's why we do economic sanctions. That's why we support military Ukraine, because we want their victory. We want them to keep their freedom and democratic regime, because that's the best
But my point, I suppose, is this, that some in Europe, like Emmanuel Macron, for example, have consistently said, we have to talk to Putin. Europe, he says, cannot be safe and at peace.
I think we need to do everything possible, all the means. It cannot be only about talking, and we know that. That's why we're helping humanitarian help. That's why we said the refugees, yes, please feel yourself at home while you...
Before we end, I do want to address how much pressure this is putting on your own country. You have tens of thousands, I think at least 70,000 Ukrainians who've stayed in your country. 350,000 have been through your country.
Yes.
There is reporting that your schools, some schools, are you ready for that?
First of all, I want to thank our citizens. They proved great solidarity. They welcome all these people with great warmth. They even invited them into their homes and support them, feed them, and really, because we have still a lot of vacant places. So actually, I would say, are a blessing to Slovakia because they help us to fill those empty places. So the biggest challenge, I think, is the kindergartens. That's where we are. And
But
since we had
element
Russian
of your
propaganda.
population.
Let's call it Russian propaganda.
Well, no, because I looked at polls just before the invasion began. The polls suggested that a clear preponderance of people in this country actually blame NATO rather than Putin for the rising tensions.
And that's such a wake-up call for Slovakia, but for the whole region.
Yeah, but
for the whole Europe,
my
for the
point
whole
is
world.
that you're vulnerable still. And here's what a cyber advisor to the defense minister in Bratislava said, Viktor Brejna. He said, in Slovakia, there's a wide network of true.
Slovakia and its strong leaders. Of course, I mean, we as a NATO, one example, how you can see how important it is for a country like us to be in alliance. When we were in NATO, otherwise we would have to procure it. It would take years.
Yeah,
we would have to have money
hang
for
on,
it.
where does this end? Where does this end? Because I've seen talk that you're going to host 600, maybe up to 1,000 US soldiers on your territory. A lot of Slovaks, but a lot of Slovaks don't want that.
No. There's still people under the influence of the propaganda, and we have to cope with it. We have to work with it. But as I said, we have to be bold.
In the United States and Great Britain, politicians are now saying that they believe in all of this. Is Slovakia ready for that?
Mentally or economically? Military? What are you asking? Mentally, I am ready. Economically, we're going through so many difficulties. I mean, we just now approved are in war. It's the crossroad of our destiny. And I want to live in a better world. I want to live in a world where Europe will be a strong player, global player, and where we won't need to see any other
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories.
Wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello. Well, let's get a check on the weather for some of the major centres around the globe. Here's a look at Australia. Thursday, it is going to be a good deal cooler there. A hot day in Beijing, 30 degrees Celsius. Bangkok, stormy there with 31 degrees on the cards. And plenty of hot sunshine across India and Pakistan. Temperatures mostly into the high 30s. Right day for New York City, 16 degrees Celsius, but lots of storms scattered around the Midwest.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
B-Mark mustard oil, mustard specialist द्वारा बनाया गया, करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा, परखा, आजमाया गया. The mustard specialist since 1933. बरसों से सरसों.
On the Belarusian side, migrants started throwing rocks and bricks and branches towards the Polish forces.
Lives overnight, you had people rushing to their basements.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
The conflict here in eastern Ukraine is getting... For more on the conflict here, join me, Andrew Harding, on BBC World News.
Can I get my pardon? Can I get my freedom? Something that was given to me by God that you mistakenly took from me?
He is not asking for the state of North Carolina to apologize. He's asking for the state of North Carolina to acknowledge the wrong.
Is a highly strategic spot because up that road, about an hour away, are the Russian forces. Thousands of troops, hundreds of tanks. And down that road is Kiev.
How do you feel about
of Ukraine from towns now under relentless Russian bombardment.
They're pushing slowly forwards against this town and a dozen others.
And I'm Ben Brown, live in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. I'll have the latest on those attempts to evacuate more people.
Hello, welcome to BBC News. Renewed attempts to evacuate civilians from the devastated Ukrainian city of Mariupol and its massive steel have spent hours waiting for evacuation buses that were originally due in the early part of the morning. 100 people, though, have got out over the weekend. Straight to Kyiv and straight to Ben Brown.
Appear to have run into difficulties. The Defence Ministry here in the capital, Kyiv, says that Russian forces are now blocking humanitarian corridors near the steel plant, which is the last part of Mariupol under Ukrainian control. Now, elsewhere in the city, the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia in a few hours' time, but they haven't got there yet. We'll bring you up to date on the latest details on that. But let's first of all get this report from our correspondent, Joe Inwood.
After weeks of living in the and the talks brokered by the United Nations, but the sight of a small number of civilians walking through the wasteland that used to be one of the world's biggest steel plants shows they achieved what many thought impossible. A ceasefire held, and around 100 people
have to go to the toilet with a torch and use a bag as a loo.
Svetislav is just 6 months old. Nearly half of his life has been spent underground in a bunker. For Ukraine's president, a moment of relief.
After many weeks of negotiations, after many attempts, different people, meetings, calls, countries, proposals, finally, there was not a day when we did not try and save our people.
After leaving the plant, initially just one private car arrived, greeted by the world's media waiting for the Azovstal convoy. Everyone caught in the siege of Mariupol has suffered terribly.
The scariest part is when they are shelling.
Of the talks over evacuations, few people think diplomacy will be bringing this conflict to an end anytime soon.
That's Joe Inwood reporting. Let's just put into a little bit of context the number of people who seriously injured, who haven't been able to get much medical attention while they've been trapped underground there, some of them apparently suffering from gangrene. So only 100 have been evacuated so far. Now the first buses carrying them out of, they went to Russian-controlled territory before going on to Zaporizhia. Some of them have been experiencing life, explaining what life was like underground in those bunkers of Azovstal during the conflict.
We were assured that there is a bomb shelter there, a well-constructed one. We thought it's only for 2 to 3 days, and we've been there since the 24th of February. There is no house anymore.
Speaking to Enver Skitishvili, who's Director General of the steelworks. Now, he's been telling me that this steelworks, it's a vast, sprawling industrial complex in the city of Mariupol. It dates back to 1930. And in the Soviet era, they built more than 30 bunkers underneath that steelworks. Some of them in the 1970s were built to withstand a nuclear strike. And there's also a whole network of underground tunnels reaching some 8 meters underneath the ground. So
become some kind of fortress or such an important point in the city of Mariupol. When Mariupol, especially the eastern part of the city, came under shelling by artillery, or started, we made an announcement in the city that all people, if they were injured during the bombing and shelling, could come to us. We thought it was possible we'd be shelled, but we did not expect such a genocide and such an inhuman one and the sea on two. So from a military point of view, it is a very strong and well-fortified point.
Well, let's cross over
now. So we do not think in general that it will be possible for them to reach Zaporizhia today. So there is not a lot of information about their direct place, but we understand in our estimation. We all pray to continue this evacuation procedure. As you told, there are hundreds of civilians who looked for safe place in bomb shelter on Azovstal, and demand them a lot of.
Because we had those 100 people who came out, but then since then there's been no more. Is that because the Russians have stopped the evacuation procedure, the process? What's happened? What's gone wrong?
Unfortunately, I cannot to evacuation waves. So one of them 25 persons, and next one 21, and next one 80 persons. So in general, 101 our civil citizens had possibility to. We are ready to evacuate at least 2,000 citizens. We have enough buses, enough emergency cars, but it was possible only to evacuate this number of citizens at the moment.
How many civilians do you think are still trapped in the Azovstal steel plant?
I know that hundreds. We should understand that it's not simple under continuous airstrike shelling with artillery, missiles from warships. It's not even simple to announce this evacuation to all the places where our civil citizens found.
You've talked about the 100 or so people. Have the Russians broken that ceasefire by bombarding the steelworks? In other words, have the attacks resumed on Azovstal?
unfortunately successful to have ceasefire for all this period, unfortunately.
What about in the rest of Mariupol? How many civilians are in the rest of the city who need to get out as well?
And they does not allow to evacuate to Ukrainian controlled territory. They just do deportation to temporary uncontrolled Donetsk Republic and all over the Russia. They deported at least 40.
Still trapped in Azovstal, and as the deputy mayor of Mariupol, Sergei Orlov, was just telling us, maybe about 130,000 people still in the city who want to get out. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for talking to us here on BBC News. That's the latest from Kyiv. Back to you in the studio.
Destroyed by the Russian forces. Borodyanka, you remember, around the same areas, Bucha, Irpin, those areas that were taken back from the Russians about a month ago, and of course those areas where, of course, I mentioned there the focus now on the east of the country. In the next little while here on the programme we'll have a special report from the Donbass region from Andrew Harding, has been looking at the towns there coming under this sort of Russian bombardment. So that is for its people. The comments came as EU energy ministers began emergency talks in Brussels. They're considering whether to phase in an oil ban as part of further sanctions against the Kremlin. Well, the German economy minister has admitted there is no unanimity among EU.
Other countries aren't there yet, and I think that needs to be respected. In the case of gas, for example, we would not be ready either. And this applies to other countries as well. We need a smart approach so that we don't trigger an economic catastrophe by
heavy sanctions on Russia in the financial sector. It started to move on energy from coal, which is of course the less relevant among the three fossil fuels. Now it starts discussing oil. We need to consider
not unanimity amongst all EU members. Hungary quite open about opposing any such move, both for gas and for oil. Potentially, do you see ways around that basic roadblock?
Is to engineer an embargo, a gradual embargo on Russian oil only by the end of this year. But this is a problematic option. It is a problematic option because if we go down this road, the oil prices in the short sanctioning Russian oil and gas with a punishment tariff put by the European Union altogether with no exemptions.
Briefly, if it was scenario A, which is all of those measures by the end of the year, there is another problem, isn't there? Which
India, over the recent weeks, has, for example, started to import more and more Russian oil. Still limited volumes, but the trend is increasing. So we need to avoid providing this advantage to Russia. And
of trying to bolster and solidify India's support with the EU and those other Western capitals. So plenty more on the Indian aspect of this a little later in the programme. Also to come on today's...
Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth and fractured supply chains.
But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change?
We have to wake up.
For Europe's China gamble, here on BBC World News.
Claiming that the Nazi leader had Jewish roots. Sergei Lavrov made the remarks on Italian television after he was asked how Russia could claim to be trying to denazify Ukraine when President Zelensky is Jewish.
People say that the most ardent anti-Semites are usually Jews.
Let's talk to our correspondent in Jerusalem, John Donaldson. John, extraordinary comments. Huge offence has been taken. Just take us through the reaction there's been.
Well, those comments have been front page news here in Israel all day, and as you suggest, widespread outrage. The Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett referred to the remarks as lies and accused Mr. Lavrov of using the Holocaust even further. He said the remarks were unforgivable and outrageous. And we've also had a statement from Danny Dayan. He is the chairman of the World Yad Vashem Holocaust Remembrance Centre, and he said that those remarks were absurd, delusional and dangerous, and he said that the suggestion that Adolf Hitler might have had Jewish blood was completely unfounded.
John, briefly, Israel's position in this conflict has been an interesting one. Do you think it is now likely to change?
Enough, perhaps, with President Putin, and for not offering enough particularly direct military support to Ukraine. These remarks, though, from Sergei Lavrov will put the pressure on Israel to perhaps change that policy.
John Donaldson there, live.
Well above what we expect this time of year. Now, the heat has abated somewhat, but it's still very hot here the last 12 hours and will be in the next couple of days. And we'll continue with further showers and thunderstorms across southern areas towards the Maldives, southern counties of India, scattered across Central Asia. Not as warm as it has been. Still 29 degrees in Tashkent. So that's the heat there. It will spark off some pretty beefy thunderstorms through Tuesday and Wednesday. Thunderstorms breaking out as well across southern India, into Sri Lanka and across the northeast corner. Like
B-Mark mustard oil, mustard specialist द्वारा बनाया गया, करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा, परखा, आजमाया गया. The mustard specialist since 19.
The conflict here in eastern Ukraine is getting a lot more intense. The Russians looking to seize more territory, these Ukrainian army medics busy picking up the casualties.
In our connected world, all news is international.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amreliwala. On today's Global, attempts to evacuate more civilians from Mariupol run into difficulties. It comes after 100 people trapped in the besieged steelworks did get out from towns now under relentless Russian bombardment.
They're pushing slowly forwards against this town and a dozen others in the Donbass region. But there's still no sign that the Kremlin's forces are about to deliver some kind of knockout blow.
60 countries. Welcome back to the programme. Renewed country says it's continuing to prevent Russian forces from advancing in parts of the Donbass region. The eastern towns of Lysychansk is encircled on 3 sides by Russian troops. Most of the city's residents have left, with the last remaining in desperate
under siege. We're following a Ukrainian army medic, Olive Kravchenko, pointing out the town's latest lacerations.
Look here. Boom.
He's taking... The army have taken over the local hospital. A soldier is brought in by ambulance with a head wound. His injuries are severe, says the medic. There's not much hope for him. Upstairs, a sombre silence on the wards.
You can see here the impact of this intense Russian bombardment, which we're still hearing outside now, in fact. Room after room of...
I wish the shelling would just stop. We've all watched our brothers die in front of us. So, what do this town's torments tell us about the wider war in eastern Ukraine?
There are signs that Russian troops are low.
Even here, a few civilians cling on. These parents saying they can't afford to flee. And 9-year-old Masha is trying to take it all in her stride.
Scared. Good for you.
Inevitably, those left behind here have moved underground. Alexei and Lubova Gubin still wait for good news from their radio. Says, voicing the fear that now hangs over this whole region. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Lysychansk.
Well, a glimpse of the war going on in the east of Ukraine. Out of these talks, and what does India want out of them?
Well, the two countries are very keen to try and enhance their bilateral partnerships in areas such as trade, energy, sustainability. Several times in his remarks at a press conference with Mr. Modi how important Germany felt that India was as a partner economically speaking. But of course this visit is overshadowed by the war in Ukraine. And up to now, India has maintained its neutrality on Russia, although Mr. Modi at the press conference today called for a cessation of hostilities and said that talks were the only way to end the conflict.
Let's talk a little more about that final
On the other hand, has been increasing the import of oil from Russia in recent months, and it has rejected criticism of this, saying that India gets much less energy from Russia than Europe does. Complicated, difficult subject, and that the two, I think, have some complicated discussions.
Absolutely. Bethany Bell, thanks very much for the latest on that meeting. Well, let's continue with that theme. It is business time. Samantha is here and she
hearing on how the EU can wean itself off Russian energy supplies, with Germany now signalling that they would be open to a ban on Russian oil imports. The German economy minister says they could weather an oil embargo by the end of the year. But an embargo on Russian gas is, well, that's another question. This just days since Russia turned off the gas taps to Poland and Bulgaria. On the way into the meeting, Poland's climate minister called for immediate sanctions on Russian oil and gas.
As you all know,
CEO of Maya Resources, she explained what's behind some of the differences of opinion between EU states.
You see a rift between the countries that have old refineries that are geared towards Russian-grade crude of Russian oil. Gas is a totally different matter.
Yeah, and different countries have different needs and different dependence on Russian gas and oil. So is that going to cause a split, and how big an issue is that going to be if it does?
I think on the oil side, it's not going to be that. Between 40 and 50% of their gas supplies, very heavily dependent on Russia. They need to get new gas in. They need to get LNG in. LNG contracts run, usually long-term supply contracts, run for 20. To get themselves out of Russian gas.
Cornelia Meyer there. The European Commission has accused Apple of abusing what it says is a dominant position for contactless payments using smartphones by limiting access to key technology for rivals to it. Apple says its Apple Pay system is just one of many options for consumers. Well, let's get more on this. I'm joined by our North America business correspondent, Samira. Samira, welcome to you. So a fairly robust response from Apple to this criticism. How worried are they by it, do you think?
That, you know, what Europe is doing to try and combat the big strength that we have seen emerge from big tech is to really go after these, what they perceive as antitrust tendencies. Watches that it forces those users to use the Apple technology.
Yeah, and Apple says, well, look, hey, you can use your credit card, you know, you can use cash. We aren't the only other option out there. So apart from a fine, do we know if there's anything else the EU can do to sanction, to change, to
placed by the European Commission, which outlines exactly the kinds of fines that can be levied, but also the kinds of changes that they have to make in order to be more competitive. Now, there's going to be a lot of pushback from some proprietary information here, so there is a limit in terms of how much they're going to want to share. But if these tech companies are going to want to operate in Europe, they're going to have to abide by the rules of the area.
Okay, Samira Hussain in New York, thank you. Age for public servants by 16%. Qantas has announced it will begin operating non-stop flights from Sydney to London and New York from 2025. The first Sydney to London flight will take around 20 hours, making them the world's longest client. Last month, Netflix revealed a sharp fall in subscribers and warned millions more are set to quit the service. That's it from me for the moment. Matthew, back to you.
Samantha, thanks very much. Thank you. Now, do stay with us because...
So when events move quickly, you need to make sure you have the facts, and that's where experience counts. Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across the world gives our viewers another perspective.
Global conflict and meeting countless heads of government. Frontline experience that helps me know who to talk to and who to listen to, meaning our analysis is objective, unbiased, and I promise you with absolute
works, the Ukraine accuses Russian forces of blocking humanitarian corridors in the area. 130,000 people remain trapped in that city. Now, more than 5 million people have fled Ukraine since they had called the country home for more than a decade. But many Africans say they faced discrimination from Ukrainian border officials while trying to reach safety. BBC World News presenter Peter Okoche travelled to the Ukraine-Poland border just days after Russia invaded.
We are students, we are not fighters. This is not our war, it is not our fight. We want to go. We want to go.
As they fled, many have been treated as second-class citizens.
We are not allowing.
They were stopped from boarding a bus.
I was begging. The official literally looked me in my eye and said in his language, only Ukrainians, that's all. That if you are black, you should walk.
Another Nigerian trying to escape was Dr. Awofa Gogo Abite, a surgeon and university lecturer who lived in Ukraine for almost 14 years. He says when he arrived at Ukraine's border with Poland, alongside other
women, there are black women here as well. There are women, why aren't you letting them pass? We were the last people for over 18 hours who were let to pass. It was horrible, it was uncalled for, it was deeply inhumane.
I needed to go there.
I still don't feel safe. When I walk past, I can see people staring. I know they might do something. They could attack me or something like that.
I was reporting alongside cameraman. Because of this experience that I'd had, you know, this very uncomfortable experience of somebody judging me for my skin color, it made me understand what these people who had crossed from Ukraine were telling me.
The love shown is overwhelming at the borders. Little things, but they make you feel like crying.
The Ukrainian government has said Africans should be offered equal opportunities to return home.
The residential area of Manila has killed at least 8 people, including 6 children. The blaze started on the second floor of a house in a crowded settlement inside a sprawling university campus. Around 80 homes were destroyed. The cause isn't yet known. Variant. The trials are being carried out on people who've not previously been vaccinated and those who have. China is battling to contain the spread of Omicron with restrictions tightened in Beijing. In Shanghai, much of the city remains under lockdown with Now, for the first time in more than 2 years, Britons, Americans and travellers from around 60 other countries can now go.
Reopening to the world, but for these passengers, it's so much more.
I originally applied for a working holiday visa in February of 2020, and I'm finally here.
Amazing. The older you get, the more fun.
So it's very good to be back. I'm sorry.
From today, vaccinated travellers from more than 60 countries are allowed into New Zealand without quarantine, after one of the world's longest and toughest border restrictions. But they're arriving in a nation still adjusting adults double vaccinated, most rules have now been stripped away. But people are still nervous. Recently, New Zealand's seen one of the world's highest COVID transmission rates, and more than 700 people have now died with the virus here.
It is a shock. Like everywhere, we've kind of got used to that, but it is still unpleasant.
It'll be later in the year until New Zealand welcomes travellers from other parts of the globe, including India and China. But for those who can arrive, this is a
element of not giving a running commentary, but the majority of those people still to get to the town of Zaporizhzhia, but some of those already getting out, talking about the horrors of what they've endured over the last 2 months.
बीमाक मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया.
Remain in force here. Meanwhile, there's plenty of dry weather in towards the desert southwest, but quite unsettled for the Pacific Northwest. It's unsettled for the northern quarter of South America, and we've got this line of showers and storms affecting parts of Paraguay and Uruguay to the south of it for much of 41 degrees in Riyadh. It stays quite unsettled into Turkey and the Caucasus and across into the Caspian Sea thanks to another area of low pressure. The heatwave conditions continue across the northwest of India into Pakistan, maybe not quite as hot as it has been of late. Southern India, and particularly the northeast of it, pressure has been building across much of eastern China, the Korean Peninsula and Japan. So here, dry with some sunshine. It's pushed that weather front southward, so we should see some sunshine appearing in Hong Kong over the next few days. This weather front bringing some damp weather into
documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
If I'm in jail, I'm living my life meaningfully.
Our World, this weekend on BBC World News.
The conversation around
climate change, vaccines, Europe, the Taliban, Ukraine. Symbolically, it's very important. Let's take this stage by stage. Here's the BBC Stephen McDonald in Beijing. The West has stepped up sanctions against Russia. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? Next week.
Every day, all the time we spent in the bunker, they were bombing.
Officials in eastern Ukraine say they're on the verge of a humanitarian catastrophe as Russia continues its push to take over the Donbass region.
I'm Ben Brown.
We'll take a look at the new technology that clubs hope will help tackle concussion in sport. Blocking humanitarian corridors near the steel plant, the last part of Mariupol under Ukrainian control. Elsewhere in the city, a group of civilians have spent hours waiting for those evacuation buses that were originally due in the early part of the morning. A two-day ceasefire over the weekend did allow about 100 people to escape. Let's get all the very latest. Let's head to Kyiv and to Ben Brown.
Yes, hello from Kyiv. Well, the latest attempts to evacuate civilians from the port city of Mariupol and its massive Russian forces are blocking humanitarian corridors near the steel plant, which is the last part of Mariupol under Ukrainian control. Elsewhere in the city, a group of civilians have spent hours waiting for evacuation buses. Seen daylight for 2 months. Now, they were expected to arrive a bit later on in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia. I've just been talking to the deputy mayor of Mariupol. He says it's not likely that they will get there by tonight. Let's get this report then from...
it to relative safety.
I can't believe it. 2 months of darkness. When we were in the bus, I told my husband we won't have to go to the toilet with a torch and use a bag as a loo.
Svetislav is just 6 months old. nearly half of his life has been spent underground in a bunker. For Ukraine's president,
from Azovstal. After many weeks of negotiations, after many attempts, different people, meetings, calls, countries, proposals, finally, there was not a day when we did not try and save our people.
After leaving
The scariest part is when they are shelling, when you see a shell exploding and people dying.
It's reported that as soon as the evacuation had finished, Russian forces resumed their The Kremlin released these shots showing an Iskander missile launch. They claim it strikes a command post, while the Ukrainian military say this shows the destruction of 2 Russian patrol boats by one of their Bayraktar drones.
There are up to 1,000 civilians who've been trapped there for weeks and weeks, and they haven't been evacuated yet. There's also 2,000 Ukrainian fighters in that steelworks underground who say if they surrender, they'll just be killed by sea. But those who did get out, some of them have been sharing their experiences, as you heard there in Joe's report, of living in those underground bunkers during this war.
The soldiers came and escorted the first 11 people left there. For a month we were eating, over 40 of us, 6 food tins. We boiled 2 buckets of soup out of them, and that was it for the whole day. We were assured that there is a bomb shelter there, a well-constructed one. We thought it's only for 2 to
Of course there isn't. It cannot be intact, as there were bombings every day. All the time we spent in the bunker, they were bombing.
Well, those who have been evacuated, the 100 or so, are expected. The city of Mariupol has said they're not expected there now today. But let's hear now from our correspondent, Laura Bicker, who's waiting for them in Zaporizhia.
We know that the convoy with around 100 women and children from the Azovstal steelwork is on Kyiv. We've seen people here from Kherson, so we know that they can make it here, but many of them are making it here in private vehicles, which they've had to scavenge the parts together to get that vehicle to work. In fact, we've seen taped up windows, we've seen taped up boots of so that there may be several hundred people still within those steelworks. There are also thought to be around 500 wounded servicemen. We know that talks are underway to try to broker yet another deal to get those people out safely, but that may prove difficult.
Steel plant in the beginning, at the start of this war. Why did civilians go into those bunkers, and why did those Ukrainian fighters go there? Well, the Azovstal steelworks, just to give you an idea, is a vast steel and iron plant, one of the biggest in the world. Who is Director General of the Azovstal Steelworks.
We never thought about it until 2014. We didn't imagine that Azovstal could become some kind of fortress. When Mariupol, especially the eastern part of the city, came under shelling by artillery, heavy artillery, we started to think about what we could do if the escalation came further into the city. And we started to restore bomb shelters, which remained from the Soviet Union. There were 5 very powerful bomb shelters that, according to Soviet standards at the time, could withstand such an inhumane war. Azovstal is surrounded by water on 3 sides, a river on 1 and the sea on 2. So from a
of the city of Mariupol, which has been besieged and bombarded for so long by Russian forces. And I asked him when he thought those first 100 evacuees from the steel plant would make it to the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia.
We know that the
people trapped in the Azovstal steelworks Do you think you're going to be able to evacuate them as well? You've got about 100 out so far, but there are many hundreds more.
We all dream, we all pray to continue this evacuation process. Next negotiation even before, and it should be, absolutely should be next evacuation to save our civil citizens.
But why has the evacuation stopped for now? Because we had those 100. The Russians have stopped the evacuation procedure, the process. What's happened? What's gone wrong?
Unfortunately, I cannot comment a lot because negotiation comes on high level with the Ukrainian government, Russian government, with a lot of international organization. As I understand, it was two evacuation waves. So one of them 25 persons, and next one, and all of them are in the process of movement to Zaporizhia, and they passed through filtration in Bezymena, and now they are on the way. We are ready to evacuate at least 2,000 citizens.
That's the latest from here in Kyiv. I'll hand you back to the studio in London.
Ben, thanks very much. A couple of lines to bring you coming from US officials. Reuters news agency reporting that Russia has launched more than 2 on the programme. Israel demands an apology from Moscow after Russia's foreign minister compares the Ukrainian president to Adolf Hitler. Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across the world gives our viewers another perspective. I love the pressure of being live, reflecting on the world in real time. Dependent on Russian energy has indicated it could weather a phased ban on Russian oil, but it's conceded that other countries in the bloc aren't quite there. Well, earlier I spoke to Simone Tagliapetra from the think tank Bruegel.
There are basically 2 ways the European Union is now considering is to engineer an embargo, a gradual embargo on Russian oil only by the end of this year. But this is a problematic option. It is a problematic option because if we go down this road, European Union from Russia, this measure would cut Putin energy rent immediately while maintaining the flows going and minimizing the impact on the European economy and also on the global economy. This might be
another problem, isn't there, which it gives Moscow time to find other markets outside of the EU.
Absolutely. It gives Moscow time to find alternative buyers of oil, and we see already countries to Russia, and that's why the tariff idea might indeed be better off rather than the gradual embargo.
Now, Israel has demanded an apology from Moscow after the Russian foreign minister compared the Ukrainian president to Adolf Hitler.
But Hitler also had Jewish blood. It means absolutely nothing. Wise Jewish people say that the most ardent anti-Semites are usually Jews.
Well, that was Sergei Lavrov. Let's get more of the reaction there has been from Jerusalem. Here's John Donaldson.
Well, those comments have been front page news here in Israel all day, and as you suggest, widespread outrage. The Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett referred to the remarks as lies and accused Mr. Lavrov of using. He is the chairman of the World Yad Vashem Holocaust Remembrance Centre, and he said that those remarks were absurd, delusional and dangerous, and he said that the suggestion that Adolf Hitler being tough enough perhaps with President Putin and for not offering enough particularly direct military support to Ukraine, these remarks though from Sergei Lavrov will put the pressure on Israel to perhaps change that policy.
John Donaldson. Now, elsewhere, presidential election. Now, Donald Trump lost the state to Joe Biden by a narrow margin. He then called Georgia's Secretary of State, asking him to try to find the votes he would need to win. The grand jury will not decide on guilt, simply on whether Mr. Trump should face charges. Now, research suggests the impact of repetitive concussions in sport, especially women, will have dire consequences for some people in later life. Here in the UK, the government is expected to take
serious risk that is coming over time.
Early research shows women can be more vulnerable than men.
It only takes two people to go up for a header for a ball. You get each other's heads instead of the ball. You know, you're fully focused on winning that. It's time that now something
Developed around the world.
Click the mouse when you hear the high pitch.
The idea is that sports clubs could scan all players at the start of the season using these images for comparison if an injury occurs, looking at how the brain's been affected and when it's
boxing, whether you're at football, hockey, rugby, it doesn't matter. You can have one of these in your physiotherapist kit room, and if somebody is concussed for whatever reason, it's applicable to them at that time.
I've had quite a few MRIs.
This is absolutely normal scan. There's no sort of health problems.
Now there's a push to come up with standard rules for handling concussion in all contact sports for men, women and children.
The speed, the strength of these.
So how did Jess get on with her trial run with the scanning device?
So your scan with these data is going to look like that, like the one at the front one, the baseline. Nice, okay, nice, cool. And normal.
Nice.
You've got a brain.
Yeah, thankfully.
Place in Scotland. The aim is letting people play their favourite sports while keeping them safe. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Just time to show you these pictures because millions of Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid, which marks the end of the month-long fasting of Ramadan. And these were similar scenes in Afghanistan. This, the southern city of Kandahar, is the first time the event has been held since the Taliban took back control of the country. I'm back with headlines in a moment and a full edition in 30 minutes' time. Hopefully, I'll see you then.
Hello there. Heatwave conditions have continued across much of the northwest of India, parts of Pakistan, with temperatures in the upper 40s Celsius, so well above what we expect this time of year. Now, the heat has abated somewhat southern counties of India and in towards Sri Lanka as well. And quite a few showers are likely on Tuesday across the northeast into Bangladesh. Some of these could be really violent in places. Further north, we've got torrential downpours could lead to some localised flooding. The outlook for Colombo stays thundery, warm and humid. For Dhaka, the showers should tend to ease, I think, towards the end of the week. Mumbai, dry, sunny and pretty warm. Tashkent will see those thunderstorms also clear away.
Predictions and top punditry. Go online or download the app now.
बीमार्क मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया गया द मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट सिंस 1933 बरसों से सरसों
I've reported on health and medicine for the BBC for around 30 years, and that's taken me around the world looking at global disease threats and innovations in medicine. These girls are benefiting from a vaccine which is offered routinely in wealthier countries. I first became aware of this new coronavirus in early scenes about how the virus is transmitted, and it's my role as medical editor to put that clearly and succinctly for the audience. It is hard to overstate just how important this vaccine could be. It was always clear that vaccines would be our route out of the pandemic, so it was a privilege to be able to film the very first volunteers to receive one of the vaccines during the trials. Ultimately, it is science we have to thank for giving us this route out of the pandemic. Coronavirus is going to be with us for years and years. We're going to have to learn how to live with it, but hopefully we'll not see our lives.
The statue behind me has stood as a monument to friendship between Ukraine and Russia. Now, after 2 months of all-out war, that relationship is in tatters. Join me, Joe Inwood, for continuing coverage of the invasion of Ukraine here on BBC News.
This is BBC World News. Our main headline. constant Russian shelling as the Kremlin continues its push to take over the Donbass region. Germany's economy minister has said there is no agreement among EU countries on winding down supplies of Russian energy. He was speaking at an emergency EU summit which had closed the country's borders. People from more than 60 countries can now visit.
Now from Singapore, examining the Asia on BBC World News.
An economic crisis that is disrupting lives of ordinary Sri Lankans. The country is facing its most severe political crisis too, that is threatening to unseat a political dynasty that Welcome to Talking Business Asia. I'm Archana. A nation of 22 million is in the midst of an economic and political emergency. Thousands are taking to the streets daily to protest. They are frustrated with shortages of essentials and a dramatic increase in the cost of living. A call for change. These protesters are chanting, they will not leave until the government does. For days, Sri Lanka's prices of daily necessities have shot up dramatically. The country's reserves of foreign currency used to pay for these imports has dried up. Citizens have spent their days in queues, buying petrol, cooking gas and food, many times returning empty-handed.
Most of my time is spent on finding fuel. I can't take passengers, and so earnings have fallen.
Without enough fuel to generate electricity, power basic food items in a typical lunch costs 3 times more.
The cost of living has made things difficult. In the past, we had 3 meals, but now we've reduced to 1 to 2 meals.
The government's decision to ban the use of chemical fertilizers in farming reduced what crops produced. Exports of tea, an important earner of foreign currency, fell. But the biggest reason?
Drugs, even medicine.
When the pandemic curtailed global tourism and forced textile factories to shut, Sri Lanka lost 2 of its most important sources of foreign currency. Both industries make up nearly 20% of GDP. Is negotiating with the IMF as well as some of its biggest creditors, China and India, for emergency loans and to delay payment or cancel part of their debt. The man leading these crucial negotiations is Sri Lanka's current finance minister. Countries such as China for credit lines to ease the financial burden. I met him in his office right after he returned from meetings for a bailout package with the International Monetary Fund and other creditors. Mr. Sabri,
back our supply lines restored and service the creditors who are not subjected to the restructuring. And to kickstart the economy. So somewhere lately there is no breakthrough. I don't see anything right now. The ambassador for China in Sri Lanka had mentioned that it's not the most desired thing for the Sri Lanka to go for IMF. But on our part, we did not have a choice. We will explain to them and we will continue to discuss with them. And they are a good friend of Sri Lanka for a long period of time. A normal IMF bailout package would mean, and they've very specifically specified as well, that you have to raise taxes, you have to float your interest rates, you have to cut down. The country to sustain, if you are not having like large oil reserves or something, tax revenue need to be 13, 14, 15% bare minimum. So we have 8.6%, which is definitely not sustainable. We must have a safety net to look after the poor. So we are working with the World Bank in terms of cash transfers and supporting them so that they will be protected.
The decision to suspend your repayments, debt repayments, was a tough one because that puts you
Kind of a fact that we did not have the money and we had to declare a moratorium. But I'm sure and I'm confident that our creditors, we will discuss with them, find a way to restructure it, and then probably we will gain market access as soon as possible. Again, very, very difficult for me to give a timeline. I hope and pray that it is as soon as possible, probably 6 months, 1 year down the line, but I don't know.
The people are already burdened with the economic crisis.
Yes, they are suffering, and it is a very unfortunate situation. But what are the choices we are left with? Do you want the whole system to collapse, and then there is absolutely nothing? Bank cannot open LCs, no importations, and then no goods at the ground. So you need to have a balance and go through the pain so that you regain. So many countries have gone through this.
Mr. Sabri, as finance minister, what will you do different so that your country is not in this sort of a situation anytime later in future?
Realistic revenue mechanism so that we are not necessary to go and lend somewhere else, because your tax and the other revenues support your day-to-day expenditure. And we will promote investment in terms of instead of the areas which we have identified. We are in the process of developing a 10-year map from crisis to growth.
The opposition parties have said they have, support of next few days or weeks. Would that not be a concern to your creditors who are also looking forward to some political stability in the country as they discuss restructuring?
Yeah, it will definitely have an impact. Basically, this is an economic crisis. No one is providing. So right now, important thing is to have an economic recovery plan and get that going immediately.
That was Sri Lanka's Finance Minister Ali Sabri. Time now for a short break. When we come back, how was
बीमार्क मस्टर्ड ऑयल मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट द्वारा बनाया गया, करोड़ों द्वारा जांचा परखा आजमाया गया। द मस्टर्ड स्पेशलिस्ट सिंस 1933, बरसों से सरसों।
Welcome to Click. We're outside again.
The race is on to decarbonise aviation.
It's like technology telekinesis.
Sensors to track dangerous. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ros Atkins. Outside.
Welcome back. The tea industry is one of the main sources of foreign exchange for Sri Lanka. But a sharp drop in exports because of the pandemic and an ill-fated push to organic farming has given a jolt to the industry. We travelled to tea estates. Fernando, the CEO of Dilma Tea, about the extent of the impact.
Initially, where it concerned the safety of our people was the fact that we had to build parallel transport networks. That was going back to the pandemic. Extending that into there again, it's an increase in costs because you're running generators, you're building capacity for fuel storage, you're doing things that you have never done before. And you're seeing a lot of businesses adapting.
Does this uncertainty, both on the economic side,
Importing and supplying stationery and different items, I mean, that side of the business is completely closed. There is another side where here, Resplendent Ceylon with tea tourism, that side has found its ability to engage impact on different sectors.
how has this economic crisis affected your plantation workers? Are they participating in protests to talk about the impact of the crisis on their lives?
Absolutely. This is a people's protest. It's not a political one. It's the people crying out for better government for more competent management of the economy, and it's the people fundamentally recognizing that now is a time for us to forget what has distanced us and look to what unites us.
Do you also go to these protests?
Absolutely, like everyone in my family, our colleagues and so on. What is important about this is the environment in the protests. It's not one of agitation, not of violence. It is one of for less politics. There is nothing in that to oppose or not to support.
Let me talk to you about the impact of this rapid switch from chemical fertilizers to organic fertilizers. What was the impact of that on your?
It did. It didn't impact only the plantation sector. It wasn't just tea, rubber, it was also spices, it's food production generally. The market simply doesn't exist for a nation to convert overnight, certainly not in tea. It would have been a catastrophe. The assumption 20-30% increase in value, that was theoretical and completely ill-informed. So it came at the worst possible time, and it has had a debilitating effect. But fortunately, with the reversal, we're seeing around us the big, and it's connected as much with the increase in logistics cost. You're not talking about 10-20%, you're talking about 100-200% in cost of freight. So in that environment, you have also countries that are battling inflation, particularly food inflation. So the lockdown, the zero COVID policy has imposed severe restrictions on supply.
Are you diversifying to other markets, other products?
At this point, it's diversification that will keep the market going. Always going to have a relatively high cost of production. So in that environment, the future lies in diversifying. For our part, we are looking at authentic iced teas. We're looking at different products that are based on tea.
Cusp of change. But for any financial rescue package to work, the economic stability of the country is the most desired. Will officials be able to secure a bailout package from IMF? And what long-term changes need to be made to ensure Central Bank of Sri Lanka? I'm Dr. P. Sarvanamuthu, Executive Director at Center for Policy Alternatives. Let me come to you, Dr. Sarvanamuthu, first. Do you think Sri Lankan government let the situation and the issues get too bad before this time?
People have been through. They shrunk the tax base. They tried to bring in organic fertilizer overnight. Anyone who has, I would have thought, any sense of economics would have realized that this was gross mismanagement.
Dr. Pereira, now that the government of Sri Lanka is looking at with the International Monetary Fund.
So it's not so much the bailout package from the Monetary Fund alone. It has to cover all our creditors really, and all our whatever liabilities that we owe to. Does is really bring us some credibility and accountability, which helps then to be able to negotiate with our creditors, which is one of the key issues really facing us because of our debt issue and the debt. We need to have reforms of our state-owned enterprises. We know that our state-owned enterprises are making huge losses, and that has been just ballooning. But finally, we're very happy when we have, subsidized fuel and subsidized electricity economy and cost to individuals, because that basically raises all our credit costs.
Dr. Sarvanamuthu, is it going to be easy, and is it fair, to expect a population or to put a population that is already burdened by high prices, is already burdened through the economic crisis?
Is going to lend and assist a country that cannot guarantee, cannot assure a certain degree of political stability which is required, because what we have is a deadlock now.
Most of these funds were invested in projects which now, looking back in hindsight, that they are not revenue generating. So we're not earning revenue from that, but we have to pay the interest and the capital on those projects. So that is really where the problem lies. And also because it was commercial loans, what happens is it exponentially increases.
Do you see a requirement or a need for Sri Lanka to also diversify on its industries?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is this, is that, look, We should, I mean, you know, the whole sort of manufacturing and industrialization has probably, you know, skipped us by, and now we need to go into services. The economic development of this country, we do need to focus a lot in terms of how we can, you know, release the potential of people. We want IT. That's what we want. We want IT. And, you know, given
with the simmering discontent and restoring the government's credibility. That's it for this edition of Talking Business Asia. Many thanks for watching.
Hello. Well, let's get a check on the weather for some of the major centres around the globe. Here's a look at Australia. A reasonably warm day in Melbourne and Sydney on Tuesday, but by Wednesday, Thursday, it is going to be a good deal cooler there. A hot day in Beijing, 30 degrees, 24 degrees. Cairo in the north, 34 Celsius and lots of sunshine. Here's a look at Europe on Tuesday, and generally speaking, it is fairly warm across the bulk of the continent, but plenty of showers scattered around. It's Tuesday across South America, lots of storms.
And bricks and branches towards the Polish forces.
A week of commemorative events in honour of Archbishop Tutu is well underway all over South Africa.
There's more trouble here in the Netherlands. Small groups of people destroying things in the northern city.
14 lives overnight. You had people rushing to their basements.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
The global supply chain is under
more and more things online, and that means a surge in demand for products made here in Asia. But the world is running out of warehouse space like this.
With so much congestion at many ports lately, we've got a big reminder of just how
the largest car manufacturer with production plummeting.
The fragility of the global supply chain has been exposed by a combination of factors, and it's being felt across the world. Is the chain broken forever, or can it be fixed?
But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change?
We have to wake up and we have to feed the world. That's a big job.
Can farmers, scientists and innovators overcome these challenges to protect the future